panel. This has been a heck of a day for us, a heck of a day, and this is the final panel of the day. So for those of you in the room here, don't you feel just a little bit smarter today? I know I do. It was a lot of information to absorb, and we are still going. But the FCC commissioner was really excited and happy, and she's looking to partner with all of us in this room to close that homework gap. Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork, has committed to the community. Jessica Matthews, who you heard. And by the way, you might be thinking, oh, I missed this or I missed that. Well, we recorded everything. So you'll be able to go to the website and see all of this material online. And while this esteemed panel is settling in, I'm going to get ready to turn it over. I do want you guys to stay for this whole panel and stay for the performances. And one last announcement that we have at the end of the night. So, with no further ado, let me turn it over to the great scholar, a phenomenal international personality in business, Sheila Foster.
Is this on? Yes, it is on. So this last panel is supposed to be our wrap-up panel for the day, and it's on digital inclusion. One might say the point of the conference, in some sense, Broadband matters for all of us. And we have a great lineup, and you can look at the program. But importantly for me, someone from a lot of the different sectors that I think we need to work together and to come together if there's going to be digital inclusion. And so I'm going to throw out a couple questions at the outset and see if we can get each of our panelists, starting with Gerald Pallor, or Jerry from RXI Digital, Lauren Wilson from the FCC, Jessica Walker, from the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, and then finally Luke Swarthout from the New York Public Library, and the question is, to start with, and actually let me start with Luke, what does digital inclusion look like? What are its elements, and what do we need to get there?
That's a great question. Thank you to Bruce and Clayton for putting on this event, and all of you for being here and sticking through the whole day. Let me answer that with, I think, one thing I know, one thing I believe, and one thing I think. So the thing I know is that left to its own devices, technology and the internet increases inequality. It's not a benign force. It's not a force for good. It creates, it entrenches existing inequalities. And that's a shame, because it ought to be an agent for change. And that I think is where digital inclusion comes in. What I think digital inclusion, we often talk about what we don't have. We talk about the gaps. We talk about the digital divide. I think it's powerful to talk about where we want to go. And so, to me, digital inclusion is ensuring everyone can use technology and the internet to improve their communities and their lives, right? And we're not done until everyone can accomplish that. I think there's three, so that's what I believe, and here's what I think. I think there's three components that we have to worry about: access to technology, the conditions that are necessary to adopt and use that technology, and then the applications and community. So I've been here all day and taking notes on the various panels. I think we've seen each of these components across the day. So Connect Uptown NYC is about access. The 25% of homes and businesses that lack connectivity in New York is a problem of access. Link NYC is about ensuring access. But once you have access, if you lack digital skills, if you don't have the digital readiness we heard about, if you haven't solved the privacy concerns, then all that investment in broadband isn't really going to pay off. And then even if you do all of that, if we haven't created the systems in our communities, if we're not concerned about how people are able to use this, for work, for education, if Nona Hendricks can't use this to create music and art, then all those other investments didn't work. So ultimately, digital inclusion is caring that everyone can use technology to innovate and change their communities and their lives. And we have to care about access, we have to care about the ability to use it, and we have to ensure everybody can use it for change. And once we do that, well then we can all rest.
Right. So you've said access, adoption, and application, basically. So let me turn to Jessica, who's president of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, which is the private sector. So for each of those elements, what can the private sector bring to the table to move us towards digital inclusion?
Yeah, so the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce is interesting in that we're the hub of business throughout the city. So we represent large companies, obviously some of the tech companies here in the city, but we also represent small businesses who are facing a lot of the same issues that we've heard throughout the day in terms of access. So in terms of some of the long-time neighborhood businesses, for example, that they also don't necessarily know how to sort of navigate what's happened in the last 10 years with the new customer journey and how much tech has played in terms of the new marketplace. So it really is all over the place. But I do think that the large companies in the city understand the importance of some of these issues and have really tried to address it. So you'll see that there have been lots of initiatives in the last few years trying to, Link NYC is one example, but also really trying to provide access in more public spaces. The library, of course, has been a huge player in this, but also, providing new tech space and new labs within NYCHA housing, for example. So there are some examples in that way where larger companies also see the importance and are trying to sort of play a role.
All right, great. So I want to come back to some of these examples. Let me turn to Jerry, who's with RXI Digital. One might say that you're part of the tech and innovation community, or at least a collaboration of those folks. And tell me about your view on digital inclusion and what it is that community can help with.
I come to this not only as a tech person. I'm a creator, I'm a content creator, a bit of an entrepreneur, and an educator, because I've spent 20 years teaching technology at high schools, colleges, universities, VOTEC programs, you name it. So I see education as really being the key of getting people involved. And it's I'm also a parent. My story is my son graduated high school, and I found somebody at AT&T who needed help setting up a computer, and I discovered my son didn't know what an operating system is. Education is critical, and we have to catch up and bring the kids, bring them up to speed. It will happen through the schools. The programs are getting there, but it just takes time. As far as broadband goes, I've heard a lot of talk about broadband today. To my mind, broadband is gigabit service. And when people have been talking about broadband today, they're just talking about access. Now, I have a mobile hotspot in my house. I'm a rural guy. I live out in the sticks, and I have a data cap. It's now up to 30 gigabits a month. And when I want to go something, I see that little circle turning all around and around. And sometimes it loads, and sometimes it's let's go to Starbucks. So I think, I go back to when I seeing this develop, just a little bit of history, and this will be my closing comment. Back in 1927 and again in 1934, when they were writing the initial Communications Act that created the FCC, Robert Sarnoff was testifying. He was the president of RCA. They were starting a network called the National Broadcasting Company, and what they wanted was clear channel designations. They wanted their frequencies to be protected from pirates. They got that. The reason Sarnoff wanted that at that time was they wanted to sell radios. That's what RCA was. They made radios. We don't necessarily know where this is going. This is all in its infancy, and we have to leave room for people to come in and innovate, experiment, succeed, fail.
And so, Lauren, when we talk about broadband infrastructure, there's a whole kind of set of laws that regulates that, and we're not going to bore people with those. But I know that the federal government and federal agencies have policies and programs toward this. So what's the FCC doing in terms of promoting digital inclusion?
Well, we've spent, the past 7 years completely overhauling our universal service programs, and the last step came this past spring with our Lifeline modernization order, which provides a subsidy for broadband service to low-income Americans. And in that order, for the first time, the Commission made clear its commitment to digital inclusion, and I think we envision it in the same way everyone else on the panel does, that access, adoption, and then having the skills and the tools and the relevant content online that people want to see. And additionally, we think about having the tech support there as well. And so I think what's unique about the FCC is that at some point, all of the sectors that everyone here represents comes in to see us because they want something. And so I think, when they come in, the conversation now has to be, as we're encouraging investment and deployment, we also have to think about digital inclusion. And it is, as guardians of the public interest, it's our responsibility to ensure that in our rulemakings, and in our merger proceedings and everything like that, that, the companies and the different constituencies we're working with, that they're folding in those plans. And also, I think because everyone comes into us and we have those relationships, we can, connect people who otherwise would not be speaking. And I think that's important because a lot of times people get into this work and they, try to reinvent the wheel. And you don't need to do that. I think there are ways you can leverage the entire ecosystem and everyone can have their expertise and come together. So we want to also help people be able to do that.
So let me ask a basic question because, I've worked in a lot of communities and with a lot of different kinds of community-based groups. And the other night, I took a class to the Bronx, to Meta Bronx, to a minority women-owned business accelerator. The whole point is to make sure that communities like the Bronx have access to this technology and can innovate and succeed. But the thing that strikes me over and over again is that in spite of all of our best efforts, it's not happening. There's still frustration. There's still this huge gap. So you guys are all doing great work. What is the one thing that you can say that will explain to us out here who aren't involved in your work what is missing? Why aren't we there yet? What are the obstacles getting you? What is the one thing you think needs to happen to get us closer to this dream of inclusion? Luke? Or, yeah.
So let's think a little bit for a moment about what the digital divide is, right? Mm-hmm. The digital divide is the gap in access or in skills between what's sort of commonly available. It's probably not the early adopters, but like what's pretty widespread and what folks with less resources have. Mm-hmm. In 1996, that digital divide was, do you have America Online? Right? That was what the digital divide was. Do you have a computer at home? Right? Right now for teens, given what modern social media is, that digital divide is, do you have a mobile data plan? Because if you don't, you can't participate in Snapchat and right, you're having a different conversation. And so one of the challenges, I think when we say digital divide, people think of it like it's a Grand Canyon. It's like a fixed gap and we're going to fill it in or we're going to pave it. And I think we need to understand that every time Silicon Valley comes out with a new product, every time some new tech company in New York City creates something innovative and new, every time some new application comes out that all of our jobs adopt, the gap goes a little bit farther. And so we need to start thinking about solutions that are not about giving somebody a computer, but an ongoing plan for affordable devices, right? It's not how do we get broadband as it's defined today, but we should know that in 5 years, the FCC is going to change the broadband gap. And so that's not to say we don't need to, so I'm not, there are specific things that we can do, but part of the reason it feels like we're on a treadmill is that we are on a treadmill, right? And this digital divide, this gap will continue to exist until, for as long as we're out there, and we need solutions that anticipate that and try and close it over time.
Okay, how do we get off the treadmill?
Keep running.
Ha! Run faster.
No, run faster. No, that doesn't work either. The treadmill
right.
just goes
That's
faster. Been to the gym, done that.
That's right.
Well, there are three things that have to happen simultaneously, and it's in order for it to realize progress, and that's basically public policy, technological innovation, and business profitability. If the innovation doesn't work, then the whole thing falls apart. If the public policy doesn't support technological innovation, the whole thing falls apart. So it's really three areas that need to be examined and worked on. But you also have to let people, it's not going to happen overnight. You went up and you did one workshop. Well, where are those kids going? I'm working right now with a boxer from the Bronx. This kid ran with the gangs when he was younger and learned how to box and became a world champion. He has an incredible story, but it didn't happen overnight. You go up to those parts of the Bronx now. This was, 1977 when Howard Cosell says the Bronx is burning on the. Well, he actually didn't say that. I've seen the video, but they were showing the Bronx burning, and he says, I was the one burning them down. So it just takes time. Maybe it takes a generation, but it's still the support has to be there. The motivation has to be there. You have to supply hope.
But do we need more than hope? And so, Jessica, do you?
And skills.
But part of what I heard from Luke is kind of an economic story about the inability to purchase the technology and the access, not to mention the training, et cetera, that you need to even keep up, right? Innovation is happening so quickly. So just back to the private sector and some of the work that you're doing, what's the economics of this? I mean, and
Sure.
How can we move that forward?
Yeah, I mean, so listen, part of it, I think, is the solution is sort of the Silicon Harlem model, in that today they've created tangible, real goals that are achievable, and which are all about creating the right partnership, having the right people in the room. So now you're bringing together the private sector with the community to achieve those goals, and I think that's really what needs to happen. It's a broad problem. It's huge, obviously.
Yeah, it's huge, yeah.
So it really does take the concerted effort and, like I said, real goals that people
Right.
can work towards.
Okay, so Lauren, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
I think what I'd like to see is more representation and inclusion in Washington so that people from Harlem and Detroit, activists, organizers, business people, are having their voices heard in Washington during the policymaking process. Because without that, I think you have muddied interests coming in to see us claiming to speak for you.
Yeah, that's good.
But we're not getting, the reality of what it's like, in local communities and kind of how the rules we make can be tailored to those communities. And there's a lot of money in Washington, too. Our universal service programs fund broadband networks for schools and libraries, but if a school in your district doesn't know how to, make a compelling application, you're not going to get that funding. And same with grants from USDA or getting Community Reinvestment Act money. So I think, we need to do a better job of reaching out to communities to know that all of these resources are available and that we need to hear from you. And I think we need to do a better job of fighting back against those, special interests who come in claiming to speak for people of color and for minorities and things of that nature. And, I'd also like to see people involved in the rulemaking process. Everything we do, we put out for comment. With net neutrality, we got 4 million comments. And I think one of the things that moved the chairman and the commissioners most was hearing from people of color just about how the internet enabled them to make change. At my old job, we organized a lobby day and brought Black Lives Matter activists in to speak to the chairman, and it really had an impact on him. And so I think we want to make sure that once people have access, it's not second-class access, and that only happens, if your voice is being heard in Washington in all of these different proceedings, privacy, open internet. I know right now they're working on a petition about whether they're going to allow, schools and libraries to extend their networks to people's homes and to, public housing, and, the FCC's E-rate program would still support that traffic, and school districts wouldn't have to pay for it. And I think that's something important that, New York schools need to weigh in on, and specifically, schools in this neighborhood and other neighborhoods. So I think that inclusion on the policymaking front is something that can help us get off of, that trajectory.
That's right. So questions from the audience? Yes. Yes, in the back. Yes.
Sorry, taking up my minutes. I think education is the start, and I was talking to someone sitting next to me, and I think if we make a commitment, in this audience today, it's almost like preaching to the choir. If we all make a commitment to speak to 5 people, could be friends or organizations, to let them know that the real divide that we have and the need for inclusion, because a lot of it is just a lack of information. I had a terrible discussion about what President Obama didn't do, with these couple ladies, and she's talking about the increase in the prison population and whatever, and what she didn't realize was that the prison population in the federal prisons have in fact remained the same. It's the ones in the local prisons, the state. So she's worrying about the president when it's the governors, and so a lot of it is just information. And she says, well, he didn't send anybody with all these shootings, and he should have sent Loretta Lynch and this. And I said, oh, he did. He sent to Missouri, he sent to Philadelphia and to Baltimore. So, and both of these women were physicians, and one was an MD, PhD. And I was like, if these people do not know and they don't speak up, it was the worst free dinner I ever had.
This goes to your point about right? People need to know which, not just get educated, but know how to intervene too. Is partly what I'm hearing. Right? Okay.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
I think one of the important things is to, with groups like Silicon Harlem, to promote success stories, to let people know what works.
Yeah, I'm involved with a neighborhood domain name in New York City, JacksonHeights.nyc. The city is licensing these neighborhood domain names to neighborhoods around the city. And I've learned recently that there is absolutely no engagement for the public in governing this. There's no inclusion of the public in process for determining how this digital resource that the city has, this .nyc, works. And I'm wondering, it's just not included in our city charter. Our city charter was written before there was an internet. And I'm wondering if there's any hope of having the internet included within the governance process, where the public can participate.
That's such
in
a
some
great
way or
question.
another.
That's such a great question. So, any hope in the public participating in what goes where and who gets what and what gets, approved as a domain? Anyone want to?
I don't live in New York City anymore, but I remember back in the day when they were putting the cable franchises together, there was intense public participation. And you would think that since all of the infrastructure that goes in, the fiber that has to be strung along utility poles are buried underground, since all of that is using public right-of-way, that there should be some.
There are community boards, but their reach is limited. Lauren, so maybe you know that because a lot of this is federally regulated.
I think one way to make that happen would be for the public to write to their representative or their council member. I know if something involves us, it's always the case that a congressperson will pass along, the message from the constituent, and then we get back to them and let them know kind of different proceedings they may be interested in. But I'm not sure how it works on the New York City level, but at least on the federal level,
There's comment in the federal level.
Yeah,
There's
so.
commenting process here in New York City, 0.
And
Right.
you
A
know,
lot of this
but
is
I
done
think-
right through local agencies like Do It and other agencies. Yes, did you want to add to this?
I have sort of an additional question about a topic I think we've been talking about all day, about essential to digital inclusion is young people and kids and getting them started at an early age. I have 2 children that go to public school in Harlem, and they have a great school, but they don't have any resources. They don't have any sort of parents groups that fund these, after school activities or technology or STEM, really, besides the sort of core reading and writing and math skills. What, as a parent, can I do living in Harlem who wants to help my children and their schoolmates, be part of this digital generation?
Right.
How
So this is
can I help my
a great question. I think it's linked to the previous question about how people get involved, whether it's with the local government or in transforming institutions. Luke, you want to take this?
So one is it's a question of weighing in with city council members. I'm as a longtime New York resident the same way, would sort of if the process doesn't exist, we need to create it. I don't have a particularly terrific answer for that. I mean, we talk about the programs we want or the computers we want. If I could go back and re-answer your what's the one thing that could change, I imagine there was a point where electricity went from a nice to have to a need to have.
Right.
And when it went from a nice to have to a need to have, we rolled out things like the rural electrification process and massive investments to make it so that every household has electricity, because it was just a part of what we assumed every American needed to have. And so the change needs to happen is the internet needs to fully, not just for the people in this room, although it's being led by the people in this room, go from a nice to have to a need to have. Because when that happens, then everybody sees that that's an unacceptable failure, in the same way that if you didn't have math, right? And that's where the internet is. That doesn't answer your immediate question about the next step, but I think your question reveals the problem.
Okay, yes.
I was just going to say, to answer his question over there about, getting kids engaged, there are resources out on the internet, and there's a particular name that you can search under called Coder Dojos, and there's a curriculum guide and everything, and it's designed or it's funded by a lot of the tech company foundations, and it's designed for any organization, church organization, after school organizations, to get it and started with a very, very simple way of teaching young people how to make computers do things.
Actually, can I self-promote for a second? You should come to the public library. We're rolling out coding clubs for kids. We're rolling out a teen coding program where we have kids develop their own video games and do it competitively across 3 boroughs, so they're competing with other peers. We're trying to fill that gap. It won't solve all of the problems, but we see this need, and we want to be a part of a solution.
So mics are up. Lauren, go ahead.
And the cable franchising system, I think, is a good way to organize too. Cable franchise agreements have to be renegotiated and approved by state PUCs. And so I know in Philly, Comcast's franchise agreement was up again. And so they did a really good job in Philly of organizing in order to kind of leverage that process to get a lot out of Comcast, so that they were paying their fair share and reinvesting, into local schools and local neighborhoods. And so I think, that's just one organizing tactic people might be able to use in New York as well.
I believe the schools are being wired. That's already, those contracts have already been let, and they're going to be wired for broadband.
We're talking about 10 years, computer,
Right.
I would hope it wouldn't take that long.
Yes, you've had your hand up.
I was just looking at the digital inclusion, and for a lot of people who are even included digitally, a big problem is the speed of their internet access. And is there any way to talk to them improving the speed of internet connections in New York City?
So I want to come back to this question of why isn't this a public good, broadband, speed, right? Because, for instance, schools, so part of what he's getting at, if we think electricity, Would we allow homes to go without electricity? No, we wouldn't. We have programs to make sure that people don't, right? And we have programs that are now going to put Link NYC high speed on the street. So it is becoming a public good. But the jump is into people's homes and schools, right? Because in fact, just like everyone needs education, kids need to do homework. 90% of homework, requires this, and people have to apply for jobs, and it's very hard to do so if you don't have that at home. So this question about, right, why isn't this a public good, the thing that we're, as a society, we should not be letting people go without, it's so essential, is a really one way to force this conversation.
I think the solutions are plainly there.
Tell us.
Someone who's deep in technology, the wire is in the walls already. We could get an adapter and use power lines. Would the FCC allow Harlem to be an innovation zone where, for instance, an outside vendor could come and give broadband to every single home in Harlem by snapping their fingers, by putting it through electrical wires, and not, have all the telcos fight? I mean, I got tweeted today that AT&T is buying Time Warner today, and that says to me, we're done.
That's a question I've been asking for a long time. I remember.
Is it a will issue or a Messiah?
Well, I don't know if there's a technical issue, but Italian cable television is distributed through electrical wires.
Right, but it may be an economic issue. But Lauren?
As far as would we allow it, I don't know. That's way above my pay grade. But if that's something.
In the history, have you allowed any kind of?
I mean, there are instances where municipalities are creating networks and getting broadband to people that way. It's a very politically rife issue. We tried to preempt that in North Carolina and in Tennessee and lost in court. So it's tough. And at the local level, again, you have a lot of special interests, the telcos mainly, just really fighting down bills at the local level when cities, states are trying to kind of create those networks to get around that duopoly and the price gouging that goes on from your cable and telco companies.
Okay, so one last comment before we wrap up. The brother from Detroit. You had your head in? Oh, you didn't? I thought you did. Okay. All right. Someone who hasn't spoken in the back. Yes.
Google take some town in Kansas and wired it to the high speed. I think it was another place in Virginia or something. They did that. So I'm curious why the FCC hasn't been able to get involved in something like that. And then I think almost 10 years ago when we went from VHF and UHF broadcasting and went to digital. There was talk that those wave bands might be used to create a network, a high-speed network that people could use all over the country. But I think those bands were sold to somebody else. So why wouldn't, has there been any kind of conversation? Because what we're talking about is if you don't have high-speed internet in the 21st century, it's like when FDR put electricity in the Tennessee Valley. We can't live without it, and that's the only way we're going to be able to cure the digital divide, if there is some kind of national effort to say this has to stop.
Google is going into a lot of cities now. That service is pretty expensive, though. I think, in my personal view, and it's over $100. And even signing up initially, you have to pay to do that. And I think the cost of entering the broadband market, at least on the wired side, is extremely high, and it would just be impossible for a startup to do. And so I think Commissioner Rhodes and Marshall spoke to, spectrum and 5G. And so I think, we're taking on that rulemaking now, and I think are pretty confident that 5G can deliver speeds that are amenable to, people doing their homework, applying for jobs, watching video, all of that. And so it's probably wireless that is going to be, what gets us to, 100% penetration, especially in rural and tribal areas too, because when we talk about inclusion, we can't leave that out.
Okay, Clayton's giving me the eye. But this is a great conversation. Obviously, a lot more to be said. We don't have the time, and so I'm gonna. So thank you.
Let's give them a hand. What a great final panel to end on inclusion and the challenges that come with that. But we have people that are at the wheel, really working hard at this, and Art Ware, who's constantly on this for many years, and many of you who are in this room. We are. I just want to make a couple things really, really quickly here. Announce a couple things. So, Bruce, can you bring everybody in and the volunteers? Yasmin, get all the volunteers in here if you could. All right. Well. Just for housekeeping, we are getting ready to have the young people perform. Are they ready? Yes. Well, getting ready. Okay, get them ready. In the meantime, I do want to thank the sponsors. These sponsors were active. They didn't just say, hey, we want to be put on a poster. They actually were very active, and all the way down to the bags that you received. But also helped with the agenda. Many of them spoke on the various sessions. So we're very grateful to them, and we'll continue to work with them, including some of you may have seen that Enjoy actually made some special baskets for a few of our guests. So we were very happy about that. A couple things that we've seen as highlights today. Everything from what we're doing in East Harlem, putting a resilient network in there with the RISE folks, New America. Things we're doing with Mission Possible, which is going to empower a whole bunch of entrepreneurs in this community with our partnership with WeWork. You met the great Jessica Rosenworcel from the FCC, as well as Jessica Walker. Uncharted Play. She's revolutionizing energy. I call her the next Thomas Edison. And that's all real, 15 patents in. We've also been focused on working with the chamber here in Upper Manhattan to ensure our businesses are all getting what they need to get in order to be successful. We're also working with Jessica and the Manhattan Chamber. She's covering the entire island and helping both big and small businesses. So it's been and for us, this year has been extremely busy, but extremely, I think, productive. We're right now working very hard on a bunch of STEM initiatives as well. So we have to specifically point out Boys and Girls Harbor for the partnership that we're doing with them. We're creating an after-school program and implementing it coming up this spring. And what's great about the Boys and Girls Harbor is they let the young people in their after-school program sort of operate a city, sort of think about how would you operate a city. And when we started to talk with them, we said, what if we turn that into a smart city? What if we get these young people thinking about data and thinking about broadband and things of that nature? And in our curriculum, we teach them leadership skills and all types of things, but they'll be able to build up into a smart city and create a whole capstone around that. So we're really excited about that outcome. Our relationship with the Department of Education is allowing us to instantiate our after-school programs throughout the city. So we believe, as you heard on this esteemed panel, that education is key. And we got to start as young as we possibly can. So that's what we're doing at Silicon Harlem. And then you heard the initiative this morning, which is an important one. And I hope that every single one of you today, on your phone or when you get back to your computer, go to connectuptown.nyc, connectuptown.nyc. Been a long day for me, too. I can't wait to get my hands on a beer. So when you go there, there's an opportunity to just put your name associated with this initiative where we're going to connect 100% of our homes and businesses by 2020. So we want your name added. Finally, let me say that one of the things we have done is we've partnered with Say Hello. And if any of you want to get a .nyc domain, you can go to our website, siliconharlem.net, and it is the most affordable domain you will receive in terms of the .nyc. We've been able to work out a really nice, affordable rate. So if you, that's the announcement now, which is go to our website if you want your own .nyc. You know, maybe it's your name.nyc, maybe it's your company.nyc. We have a siliconharlem.nyc already. We have a connectuptown.nyc. So we believe in that domain. We think it's really important that we continue to brand New York City. So Peter Insulaco has been with us from the very beginning. He always tells me you can always go to the website and add your name in general to our membership. So we hope that you do that. We've had over 50 speakers today. We've had over, I think it was about 12 different panels. We've had discussions that went from limitless learning to how broadband has redefined media. So it's been a full day, and I hope you felt like, you know, you were at a real conference. That's what our objective was. Some of us in our careers don't always get to go to these fancy conferences and stuff like that. We want you to know, and we're going to continue to do this so you can continue to be a part of that. It's a great conversation to have. So I am going to ask everyone who's kind of hanging around, come on in, because this performance is going to require everything. I'm going to ask our speakers to take their seats, give them one more hand as they do that. Luke has got to leave because he's got a baby, but that's all right. Doug, you heard my announcement? Good. So